Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back. So today we're going to be discussing the third step of the 12-step program. And the third step reads that we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God, right? As we understood God. So there's a distinction here between the second and the third step, because the second step, while we did speak extensively about God or our higher power, it mentions that we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, right? So the second step was really just nurturing within us a belief that there was a higher power that could return us to sanity. The third step is taking that just a little bit further, and so you'll find that the steps here are incremental, and so are the actions that are associated with these steps. That really recovery more often than not comes down to just tiny little actions that we adjust each day incrementally. Sometimes it's really just the same thing that we need to be doing consistently, but nonetheless that the adjustments, especially once we establish sober habits, can seem big initially because it's so different to what we already know. But once we have a ritual in place, then the adjustments are really quite small. So the third step is a turning point. In taking this step, we find the willingness to allow God, Allah, to work in our lives. Having accepted both the reality of our disease and the possibility that a high power can help us where our own efforts have failed, we make a leap of faith, turning to that power for assistance. Our understanding of this power doesn't need to be perfect or complete in order for us to take this step. We need only an open mind and a willingness to try something new. So the idea here, the idea that we don't need to have a perfect understanding or a complete understanding of God, of Allah, in order to take the step, is an important point, because very often we think of ourselves, especially relative to our relationship with Allah, and especially when we compare ourselves to scholars, it's easy to think that oh gosh, what a weak Muslim I might be, because I don't know the 99 names of Allah, or I don't know the 20 main characteristics of Allah, or I don't even know what else we call Allah, or I don't know when last I've turned to Allah. I don't know even to what extent I think good or poorly of Allah. And so just the whole notion of a higher power, more often than not, we can see it as having a built-in shortcoming, right? It's just being in deficit, and this step doesn't require us to have full or complete knowledge of Allah, right? We're simply making that decision to turn our will and our lives over to Allah, right? So taking the third step means acting on the belief that a higher power can relieve our addiction and restore us to sanity. We loosen the grip on our old destructive patterns, perhaps not knowing yet what will replace them. Right? Oh, just I'm getting a note that the volume is soft. Just adjust it quickly. Okay, let me try again. We loosen the grip on our old destructive patterns, perhaps not knowing yet what will replace them, but in the faith that something better will be revealed. When we surrender our old way of living to a power greater than ourselves, we don't always know where we're going, but we can be assured that it will be better than where we were. So here, there's the concept of us relying on our faith to a certain extent, not necessarily knowing how the journey will unfold. Does this sound okay now? Still low. Apologize for this. Okay. Right. So, as we were saying, the step here involves a bit of a leap of faith, in that we are taking a step into the unknown. We don't necessarily know what all it will entail when we say we turn our will and our lives over to God. But they make some interesting distinctions, right? So when you think about what does our will and our lives mean? Our will generally refers to our plans and our intentions, our desires, right? And our lives, more often than not, refer to, or in this case, refers to our actions, right? And so, really, this step is about surrendering those, surrendering that, the idea that there are things that I want, but the thing I want isn't necessarily consistent with my overall well-being. So I may want to do drugs, I may want to, get into a relationship, I may want to watch a bit of porn, I may want to do X, Y, Z, whatever, right? But that's not necessarily the best thing for me. And best here isn't, looking at it necessarily from a moral point of view. It could, be as simple as, financially it's not good for me, or emotionally it's not good for me, or spiritually it's not good for me. Any number of ways we can consider it. It's rare that you'd find a positive outcome with continuing an addictive behavior, right? And so we're saying that, those things that I want, it's not actually good for me. And so I need to let it go. And again, I don't necessarily know what I'm going to replace it with. I don't necessarily know where this is leading, but I know that I have a higher power who previously we discussed can restore me to sanity. And so in this step, I will hand my life over, even just on the level of what I desire, to my to the care of my higher power. And here's another, little word that just makes a bit of a distinction. We're not talking about to the control of a higher power. And this isn't necessarily a lesson in Akida, right? This isn't about, are we saying that we had control over our lives the whole time, and that, God, Allah, didn't have control over our lives all along. We recognize, I recognize that Allah has always had control over our lives. The distinction is simply that as addicts, we don't necessarily attribute control, right? Even though it may always lie with Allah, we don't attribute that control to Allah. We attribute it to ourselves, right? And it's part of the addictive thinking. It's part of, the ideals and the beliefs that get perverted or get twisted, and that suffer as a result of our addiction. And so, the wording here and these steps are really to rectify, again, step by step, incrementally, little by little, even just our level of thinking. Even if we, for a moment, need to consider that, actually, I'm now handing it over to Allah, because perhaps I didn't even think about, I think that I'm in control. But whether or not I think it, by me actively choosing, by me deciding, it helps that thought. It helps rectify any misplaced ideas about where the ultimate power and control lies. So how do we accomplish this? How do we, in fact, turn our lives over to Allah. Right? We do it simply by making a decision. And decision is a really powerful thing, because what we're suggesting is that there is a different code, a different set of beliefs and principles that I'll now use to make decisions. There's a different set of criteria that I'll use to live my life. And so for Muslims, you might say, okay, I am now going to more strictly adhere to Sharia, for instance. Right? I'm not going to play in the grey area of what I've lived with my whole life, or what's acceptable by Western standards, or even by cultural standards. Right? Sometimes it's not even about, I grew up in the West and now I do what I do. You can grow up in the East and still be an addict. And so it's more about us taking the decision within ourselves to just not rely solely on our own thoughts, our own ideas, our own desires, but to hand it over and to have that a criteria based on a power greater than ourselves becomes the dominant criteria by which we make decisions. So, to achieve this, it often means sticking to a ritual, sticking to a program. So it may be that if you think about like attending a meeting, or reaching out to a fellow, or doing step work like written work, or anything really, any of the actions around recovery, that continuing on those actions is basically a manifestation of you constantly choosing to hand over to Allah, because that's not what your nafs wants. That's not what your desires are about. Your desires are still potentially about your addiction, right? And so when you constantly choose to engage in an activity of recovery, you're choosing something different. You're choosing your higher power. You're choosing to trust in your higher power, that your higher power is going to care for you and to hold you and to get you through this, right? So Imam al-Haddad in his book of intentions, he speaks about vigilance, right? And I find that vigilance is a concept that really helps us get across the line here, right? So in terms of completing this transition of surrender, so Imam Haddad mentions that you must, O my brother, be mindful of God in all your movements and times of stillness, at every moment, with every blink of the eye, with every thought, wish, or any other state. Feel His nearness to you. Know that He looks and is aware of you, that nothing that you conceal is hidden from Him. Nothing that, and here's an ayah of the Quran, nothing that weighs so much as an atom is hidden from your Lord, whether on earth or in heaven, whether you speak aloud. He knows your secret thought and that which is even more hidden. And the reason Imam Haddad is bringing this in here, and the reason I'm linking it to this whole idea of surrender, is when we truly surrender, then we surrender even things like our thoughts, and we surrender it to, like I mentioned, a code. And the code here is simply, for instance, that I'm mindful that Allah has vigilance over me. I'm mindful that my thoughts are going to take me either closer to Allah or further away from Him, either to recovery or to addiction. And so when I'm vigilant over my thoughts in every moment, and it's gonna seem like, oh my God, but now how can you just like be so vigilant every moment of every day, and Like, he mentions like with every blink of an eye, and the irony here is that the blink of an eye is seen as something that happens without us thinking it. It happens automatically. But Imam al-Haddad is mentioning, even with every blink of an eye, put deliberation into it. Think about, and it's not necessarily literal, but rather choose to be that vigilant over yourself. Choose to express that much vigilance, or to maintain such vigilance in every moment, because as we continue, as we journey and venture on this path of recovery, we start to notice the power of thought, and we start to notice how easy it is to veer off the path. So there's this technique they call it watching the train go by. Because often in the mind of an addict, because of years and years of obsession and just preoccupation with our addictive behavior, we think, or a thought might occur to us, something like, let's say, wow, like you've been, like we might say to ourselves, wow, you've been really, really stressed for like super long. And I didn't even know this recovery thing is working. Maybe you need to look at something else. Maybe you need to look at something that's going to make you feel a bit better. Something that will make you, just not feel so low. Now already, you're potentially questioning the course of action here. You bring recovery into question. Right, and so now that can escalate, and you might think, what did bring me joy? And you think, I remember, like, I was, what was it, like a good time in my life? And so we might not outwardly immediately go straight to addiction, but more often than not, that's where we're going to end up, right? Like, all roads lead back there. So we might go, it's been so long, and maybe I'm actually okay, man. Maybe I can indulge just a little bit, not in the in the addiction as I know it, or as as I've defined it, but maybe like something close, like for instance with overeating, right? We start to develop a sense of boundary. So we might say, okay, look, if I dish 2 portions every night, I know I only actually need 1 portion, right? But we might go, what's another teaspoon? So I might have dished and eaten and finished, and then just like, okay, I'm just going to take another teaspoon of dessert. I'm just going to take another teaspoon of, food, whatever. But that teaspoon is where it starts. They talk about, in AA they mention, 1 is too many and 1,000 is too little, because that's how that's what a relapse is like. You start with just with 1, or just with a little bit, and then next thing you know, like, it's all over, right? So Imam al-Haddad continues that with his knowledge, the knowledge of Allah, awareness, if you are righteous, He will guide, assist, and protect you. Have modesty before your Lord as you should. Make sure that He never sees you in a situation which He has forbidden you, and never misses you where He's commanded you to be. Worship Him as if you saw Him, for even if you do not see Him, He sees you. Whenever you notice in your soul any laziness in His worship, or any inclination to disobedience, remind it that God sees and hears you and knows your secrets and secret conversation. So this part's important, because what Imam al-Haddad is talking about here is that he's giving us a guideline for actions that we are supposed to be doing, like our salah and our fasting, paying zakah, that kind of thing. Like there are faraid, there are things that we have to comply with, right? But he's taking it further to say that let Allah never find us, because between those actions, maybe those actions account for 45 minutes, maybe an hour of our day, right? Like it's really not much in terms of a time commitment. So what about the rest of our day? Like what is that determined by? And here Imam al-Haddad is giving us already a formula that let him never find you at any point in the day moving towards something that will earn his displeasure. Or, and here he's bringing back to this reminder that you have commitments, or find you missing from a place where you need to be, right? And you can apply this same line of thought to our recovery-based activity. So whether we need to be in a meeting, whether we need to be meeting with our sponsors, whether we need to be picking up the phone, or whether we need to be sitting down and writing, whether we need to be in a gathering of remembrance, a dhikr, a class of knowledge, or anything, whatever it is that we need to be, right? Let us never be found missing from that, right? And now he's going to give us a formula, right, for how do we in fact rectify this deficiency within us, that even if we say, oh, I know I need to make salah, but I just don't feel like right now. So that's again, we're now back in our will. We're not in God's will, right? And so for those listening that aren't necessarily Muslim, you might go, okay, but now how do I determine God's will? Because by what formula and that kind of thing. At the very least, you can determine it by simply recovery-based activities, right? But back to the point at hand, Imam al-Haddad is now going to give us a formula. And so already he says that the first part of the formula is to remind yourself. Remind yourself that Allah sees you no matter if you don't see Him. And that if you feel yourself inclining to something, then just remind yourself that He sees you. Live your life, in fact, as if He sees you at all times. Right? So anytime we're doing anything, just to remind ourselves, you know what? Allah sees me right now. So I'm sitting here talking to you. Allah sees me. I need to be mindful of what is the message that I'm sending out. I need to be mindful of, am I doing this with any ill intent? Am I doing this for fame, or for to call people to myself instead of calling to people to Allah? Is there anything about what I'm doing right now? And so just we have this ability to in fact monitor ourselves, right? And get clear and purify our actions and intentions on the regular, right? Moment by moment, even if we bear in mind that Allah sees me, right? So again, remember that when we talk about our will, we're referring to our intentions and our desires, and then when we're talking about our lives, we're talking about our actions, right? So so we mentioned that God sees and hears you and knows your secrets and secret conversation. If this reminding doesn't benefit because of the inadequacy of its knowledge of the majesty of Allah, right? So now we say, you know what, Allah sees me, but I still haven't gotten up and made salah. I know Allah sees me, but I'm not there yet. I'm not, Allah seeing me perhaps doesn't strike fear in my heart. It perhaps doesn't strike a longing in my heart to connect with Allah. Perhaps it doesn't strike, a bit of shame or guilt in my heart because I'm not doing something that I've in fact committed to do, right? And you think about it like, you could potentially even think about it like leaving a friend waiting, but that might still not be enough to get us moving, right? Because the waqt has come in and now we haven't moved, right? So we could then remind ourselves that, and this is also an ayah of the Quran, when the two receivers receive, which is basically our angels that record our deeds, sitting on the right and left. He utters no word, but there is with him a watcher ready. So, even in that conversation with ourselves, in that talking, in whatever it is that we're doing, we need to actually remember that it's not just that Allah sees and knows what we're doing, but our thoughts and our words and our actions are actually going down on a record, and that we have to account for it. So here, Imam al-Haddad, he increases the intensity of the message just like a tiny little notch by introducing the idea of accountability, right? And if you think about recovery, there's accountability. Like, are you going to meetings? Are you working your steps? Whatever. When you meet with your sponsor, that's something that is going to ask you, right? If you have a closed group or a therapy group, there's a check-in, right? So we've spoken extensively about accountability, and yeah, Imam al-Haddad is mentioning it yet again, right? So much so that, and this is again just the beauty of Allah. Allah didn't need to put angels with us to record our deeds. Allah could just present us on the day of judgment with our deeds in front of us. Pop it up like a slideshow, PowerPoint, or whatever. But Allah could present it in any way, right? Because He has complete knowledge. He has ultimate knowledge. But Imam Haddad is saying that, if our understanding of Allah's knowledge is deficient, then Allah has, gone so far as to place angels and teach us about these angels and the role that they play, so that it becomes yet another reminder, another reference point, another source of perhaps just a little bit more strength or motivation to get us up and to get us to go do what we need to do. And then he says that, even if that's not enough, even if we say, let the angels write it. Whatever. Like, if we're just apathetic, whatever. We go, okay, the angels are going to write what they're going to write. I can't control them, whatever. I'm just, let it be. So even if that's not enough, Imam al-Haddad takes us further. And he says that if this reminding does not influence it, remind it, and the it here is referring to the soul or the self here. Remind it of the proximity of death, that it is the nearest of all hidden things. Frighten it of its sudden pouncing, whereby if it does come when in an unsatisfactory state, we will end up in Jahannam, in an endless perdition, right? So here Imam al-Haddad is saying that, look, you've used reminder and you've used accountability. Now try a bit of shock and awe, right? Use fear, and so see if your nafs, your soul, your actions, if you're able to arouse your actions through fear, that death could come at any moment. And there's some of our teachers, a story that some of our teachers have been quoting recently about how we should pray for a good ending, because by hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, he mentions that the one who dies with La ilaha illallah in his name, it will be said to him, enter into Jannah. La ilaha illallah on his tongue, not on his name, on his tongue, right? Afwan. It will be said to him, enter Jannah. And so they tell the story of a scholar who was teaching a lesson and teaching this hadith, and he gets so far as to say La ilaha illallah, and then passes away. And so they say about him that his lesson wasn't that you enter Jannah by conveying the lesson with his speech, but rather he completed that lesson by, in fact, entering Jannah, because he died with La ilaha illallah in his tongue. And so often you hear that if someone is on their last, and visitors go and they try and encourage them, they'll recite La ilaha illallah in the room, or they'll encourage them, say La ilaha illallah, say La ilaha illallah, give them some water and say La ilaha illallah, constantly, because they're aware that these are potentially that person's last moments. And what is our last moment? Do we know? If we are the picture of health, do we know? And we think of, like this whole corona thing and how how it's spreading, how people are dying young, how we just don't know. And even then, for many of us, it may have shocked us into thinking, yeah, salam, I need to reform, I need to be better, I need to do better, But then, have we actually reformed? Or did we just feel that fear in the moment? Right? And so sometimes we need to constantly remind ourselves, there's, like with animals, they use, and it's been useful with humans as well, but it's more popular amongst animals, what they call shock therapy. So you put a collar on the animal, and there's a sort of an invisible field around, where the animal can run, but once it crosses a certain boundary, it gets a shock. So it learns to come back, to stay this side of that invisible line. So the animal learns the boundary, right, by receiving the shock. And so similarly, we can, train our nafs in the same way, reminding it that, okay, you don't want to do it, don't make salah, but you could die. This could be the last thing you do. Sitting here talking to you could be the last thing I do, and so am I going to, get up and go make my salah? Or if you're watching this video, then sitting and watching this video, you could think, you know what, but I'm engaged in something good, man. This is like a noble thing. This is potentially drawing me closer to Allah. But do I have an outstanding salah? So, it's reminding ourselves of how suddenly death can pounce. If this threat is of no use, so now we've tried fear, we've tried reminder, we've tried accountability, we've tried fear. Imam al-Haddad continues, and this, subhanAllah, this is just, a testament to how wise and how much openings Allah granted this great saint, that he gives us so many different avenues to pursue in order to get us. These are truly masters of transformation. So he goes on to say that if this threat is of no use, remind it of the immense reward which Allah has promised those who obey Him, and also the painful torment with which He has threatened those who disobey Him. Say to ourselves, O soul, after death there will be no opportunity to repent, and there will be after this life only the garden, Jannah, or the fire, Jahannam. Choose, if you will, obedience, the consequence of which is triumph, contentment, immortality in vast gardens, and the looking at the face of God, the generous, the beneficent, or else disobedience, the consequence of which is degradation, humiliation, mockery, deprivation, and imprisonment between layers of fire. Endeavor to cure your soul with such reminders when it neglects obedience and inclines to rebellion, for they are useful medicines for the heart's diseases. So Imam al-Haddad has now given us several different formulas for how to reform ourselves. That at this point we're now having a conversation with our soul, to say, oh soul, think about the action, think about the consequences. There is immense reward. Think about Jannah, think about the fruits of Jannah, think about the rivers in Jannah, think about your hurul ain, think about just the pleasures of Jannah, think about the fact that we will get to meet Allah, that we potentially spend time in the company of the Anbiya. Just wow, what immense pleasure. Or think about the fact that we'll be trapped in Jahannam. And we hear, some of the narrations, especially in the story of the Isra and the Miraj, the retelling of it, that as the Prophet ﷺ ventured through the Miraj, that he saw various punishments that people were experiencing, their lips being cut off with, scissors of fire, and the skulls being crushed, and people being made to drink their own pus, and various things. And so consider that that could be our ending. And the reason that Imam al-Haddad is mentioning this is because at this point, when you're having this conversation with yourself, you're really forcing yourself to be super mindful of the choices that you're making. You're forcing yourself to say that in fact, if I don't get up here at this moment, then I am choosing the fire. But if I choose to get up, if I choose to pause this right now, then I am choosing Jannah. And so it brings us back to the reality that while Allah is in control and while Allah has power over all things, we have choice. Allah has granted us that choice. And so we have to learn to nurture that ability of choice. We need to learn to nurture exercising our choices and then also taking a responsibility for it. Because sometimes we live life unconsciously. So we think about it that, we get up, and especially like now in Ramadan, it's a great example, because we're half asleep sometimes when we get up because it's so early. So we get up and might be tired from our ibadah the night before, and walk into the kitchen, and maybe the meals are prepared already by our family. Maybe we just eat the choice to do whatever it is that we've done. Talk to you, how have you chosen to sit here and listen to me? Right? Like, what are the choices that we're exercising? So he goes on to say, if you find emerging in your heart when you call to mind the fact that God observes you, a shyness that prevents you from disobeying Him and drives you to exert yourself in obeying Him, then you are in possession of something of the realities of vigilance, known as muraqabah. And Imam al-Haddad now goes on to speak about the great station of vigilance. He says, know that vigilance is one of the most noble stations, high positions and lofty degrees. It is the station of excellence, ihsan, indicated in the Prophet saying, excellence is to worship God as if you saw Him, for if you do not see Him, He sees you. Right? So again, these advices aren't just, it's not just, Imam Haddad is just not sucking it out of the thumb. It's rooted in hadith, for instance. Each believer has faith that nothing on earth nor in heaven is concealed from God, and God is with him wherever he is, and that none of his movements or times of stillness are concealed from him. So even in times of stillness, just consider, okay, well, I'm just sitting, I'm not doing anything. Should I be doing something else? Like, do I have a commitment? Is there something that, that has a haq over me? Or even if I'm sitting still doing nothing, where's my mind going? Right? And so earlier I mentioned the technique of allowing the train to go by. So it starts off that, I might have this thought occurs to me that inclines me towards something associated to my addictive behavior. But like an individual sitting on a platform, like where the train goes by, you can see the train arrive, you can see the thought arrive. You can observe it for what it is, and you can let it go by. And this is the nature of thoughts. Like, they can pass. We don't have to obsess over every thought. And so you might have this idea of, like, I really miss smoking right now. And so, right now in South Africa, we have the situation where the sale of cigarettes is illegal. The price of cigarettes has gone up from, I think, like 30 odd rand to somewhere around the region of 160 to 200 rand. Right? And it's illegal, but people are paying it anyway. Right? Now, there's an opportunity here for so many of us to just surrender, to go, you know what, I do feel like a smoke, but I'm going to let it go. Besides the fact that it's illegal, it's better for me. Right? And so we can have whatever conversation we want to have. But we notice the power of the nafs, that people are out there going, and spending $200 on a box of cigarettes. Right? So the nafs has, such power over us. And by us just taking this moment by moment, hour by hour, day by day, however it is that we need to, we can go, you know what, I can let this thought pass, and this craving, this too shall pass. Most of what we experience relative to our addictive behavior, if we give ourselves the opportunity, we'll find that it will pass. So, right. The important thing is that in this awareness, or that this awareness become permanent, and that its results appear, the least of which is that he does nothing when alone with God, nothing when alone with God that he would be ashamed of, should a man of virtue see him. So another little trick that Imam Haddad is giving us is that even if we're alone, that whatever we're doing, consider that if our teacher or a sheikh or someone we respected came along, would we be okay just continuing to do what we're doing? Or would we be embarrassed by it? Would we feel shy? Right? So that might be an indication that actually, no, I need to be doing something else other than however I'm spending this moment of stillness. Right? This is rare that it eventually leads to that which is rarer still, whereby the servant is totally immersed in Allah, annihilated in Him, and thus rendered unaware of all else, absent from creation through his contemplation of the true King, having arrived at a secure seat in the presence of an able sovereign. And so Imam Haddad is saying that, you know what, lose yourself in Allah. Like, you can completely immerse yourself in this idea or this concept of muraqabah, of knowing of Allah, of gnosis, right? That within it, really what you've conjured up, or what you're manifesting, is an ever-present awareness. It's a consciousness, right? A mindfulness. And this is how we in fact want to be living our lives. That this doesn't mean that we do nothing except sit and meditate all day. You can still have this consciousness even going about your business, whatever that is. Right? So with that, we ask that Allah clear the fog from our minds, and that He grant us this ability to make the decision, and the courage to surrender and to let go, and to allow ourselves to live our lives by His will and not ours, and to trust that Allah is in fact caring for us, and that He has been caring for us all along, and that we will experience the immense benefit from allowing ourselves to live a life in the pleasure of Allah. Again, if you want, you can go through the book of Assistance by Imam al-Haddad in chapter 3. There's those various formulas. Again, just as a quick reminder, using a reminder, using accountability, using self-talk, all of those as steps to shift our state of idleness or laziness, or to tip the scales when we're making a decision and feeling more inclined to our will than to surrendering to divine will. So with that, I bid you Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We'll see each other tomorrow, inshallah.